In the year 1260, a Mongol army crossed into Palestine. For 40 years, no force on earth had stopped them. They had burned Baghdad. They had razed cities from China to the Caspian. They did not negotiate. They did not retreat. But on September 3rd, in a valley called Ain Jalut, they met an enemy they had never encountered before. And for the first time in a generation, the Mongols broke. September 3rd, 1260, Galilee. The valley floor trembles. 15,000 Mongol riders, the same force that destroyed armies from Korea to Poland, the same tactics that leveled civilizations. They see their enemy below, exposed, outnumbered. They charge. The Mamluk line holds, then breaks, retreats. The Mongols pursue, standard protocol, press the advantage, do not let them regroup. But the hills are not empty. Within minutes, the hunters become the hunted. Within hours, 40 years of invincibility will shatter. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, we must go back 2 years. To the day the world stopped believing in mercy. The 13th century belonged to the Mongols. By 1258, their empire stretched from Korea to the edges of Europe. They had conquered the Khwarezmian Empire. They had shattered the armies of Russia, Poland, and Hungary. They moved like a storm, fast, coordinated, and without mercy. And then they turned toward Baghdad. At that time, Baghdad was not just a city. It was the intellectual heart of the Islamic world. 500 years of accumulated knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, resided within its walls. The Abbasid Caliphate, though politically weakened, still held symbolic authority over the Muslim world. The Mongols sent an ultimatum: surrender or be destroyed. Caliph al-Mustasim refused. He believed the city's walls were strong. He believed his army of perhaps 50,000 could hold. He believed, perhaps, that the Mongols would not dare attack the seat of the caliphate. He miscalculated. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, commanded the invasion. His force was estimated at over 150,000 soldiers, Mongols, Chinese engineers, Persian auxiliaries. They breached the outer walls in days. They flooded irrigation canals to destabilize defenses. They moved with precision. On February 10, 1258, the Mongols entered Baghdad. What followed was not battle, it was erasure. For 6 days, the Mongols systematically destroyed the city. Libraries were burned. The Grand Library, the House of Wisdom, was thrown into the Tigris River. Scholars report the water ran black with ink for weeks. Estimates of the dead range from tens of thousands to over 1 million. This was psychological warfare. Baghdad's fall was not just about conquest. It was about sending a message to every ruler from Damascus to Delhi: resistance is futile. Caliph al-Mustasim was executed. According to accounts, he was rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses so his blood would not touch the ground. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had stood for over 500 years, ended in a week. And the world understood. The Mongols were not just another conquering army. They were a force that erased not just kingdoms, but the memory of kingdoms. From Syria to Egypt, rulers calculated their odds. Christian crusader states negotiated alliances with the Mongols. Muslim kingdoms fragmented. There was no precedent for stopping them. No strategy had worked. No alliance had held. No fortress had lasted. But in Cairo, a different calculation was being made. Among the slave soldiers who now ruled Egypt, there was a young commander named Baybars. He had survived the Mongol destruction of his homeland. He had been captured as a boy, sold at a slave market, trained to fight. And now, watching the smoke rise from Baghdad, he understood something. The Mongols could be beaten. It would require perfect timing, perfect preparation, and a willingness to sacrifice everything. He began to plan. In 1259, far from the battlefields of the Middle East, Mongol Khan, the great Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire, died. The cause is unclear. Some sources cite dysentery during a campaign in China. Others suggest illness or injury. What matters is not how he died. What matters is what happened next. Word reached Hulagu Khan in early 1260. His brother, the supreme ruler of the Mongol Empire, was dead, and the question of succession was open. Hulagu faced an impossible choice. Mongol law required the presence of senior princes at a Kurultai, a grand assembly, to elect the next Khan. His vote could determine the future of the empire. But he was deep in enemy territory, commanding a massive expeditionary force thousands of miles from the Mongol heartland. His army was the largest Mongol force ever assembled in the West, over 150,000 soldiers. If he stayed, he could complete the conquest of Egypt. He could secure the entire Middle East. He could become the undisputed master of the Islamic world, but he would lose political leverage in the succession crisis. And in Mongol politics, absence meant irrelevance. He chose power over conquest. Hulagu withdrew. He took the bulk of his army, perhaps 120,000 soldiers, and began the long march back toward Mongolia. He left behind a garrison of around 20,000 under the command of his most trusted general, Kitbuka. This was not a retreat born of defeat. It was political calculation, but it shattered the fundamental principle of Mongol warfare: overwhelming force. For the first time in 40 years, a Mongol army was divided, vulnerable, exposed. In Cairo, the Mamluks watched, and they saw their moment. To understand what happened next, you must understand who the Mamluks were. The word Mamluk means owned in Arabic. They were slave soldiers, captured as boys, often from the Caucasus, Central Asia, or the Eurasian steppe. They were brought to Egypt, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood in the arts of war. This was not slavery as understood in most medieval societies. Mamluks were an elite military caste. They lived in barracks, trained together, fought together. They developed intense loyalty, not to family or tribe, but to their unit and their commander. By the mid-13th century, they had become the backbone of the Ayyubid military. Among them was a boy sold at a Damascus slave market. His name was Baybars. He came from the Kipchak steppes, the same region that produced many Mongol warriors. He understood their language, their culture, their tactics. He was ruthless, brilliant, and patient. By his 20s, he had fought the Crusaders at multiple battles. He had led raids. He had proven himself capable of independent command, and he had learned to wait. In 1250, the Mamluks seized power. After the death of the last effective Ayyubid sultan, a Mamluk general named Aybak took control of Egypt. It was a quiet revolution, no mass executions, no widespread purges. The Mamluks simply stepped into the vacuum and established a new dynasty. Baybars supported the coup. He became a senior commander. But he did not yet rule. By 1259, the Sultan of Egypt was Qutuz, himself a former slave. He had risen through the ranks, fought in multiple campaigns, and understood Mongol tactics firsthand. He also understood something critical. If the Mongols took Syria, Egypt would be next. And if Egypt fell, there would be no Islamic power left capable of resistance. The Mediterranean would become a Mongol lake. European crusader states would collapse or become vassals. The entire balance of power, from Africa to Europe to Asia, would shift. This was not just about Egypt. This was about whether Islamic civilization would survive. Qutuz called a council. He proposed something unprecedented: march north into Mongol-controlled territory and force a confrontation before they could reinforce. Some commanders objected. The Mongols had never been defeated in open battle. Why risk everything? Baybars spoke. He explained the Mongol withdrawal, the limited garrison, the narrow window before Hulagu could return. He explained that the Mongols were not invincible, they were predictable. And he had a plan. Qutuz agreed. He promoted Baybars to command the vanguard. he mobilized the entire military structure of Egypt. He secured grain supplies, he fortified key positions. And he sent a message to the Mongols: surrender Syria or face war. The Mongols did not negotiate. Ain Jalut means Spring of Goliath. It is a valley in northern Palestine, near Nazareth. In 1260, it was unremarkable, a travel route, a watering point, a stretch of open ground between rocky hills. It would become one of the most decisive battlefields in history. Kitbuka, commanding the Mongol garrison, received reports of a Mamluk army moving north through Gaza. He responded immediately. Mongol doctrine was aggressive: do not wait, do not defend passively, meet the enemy in the field and destroy them. It had worked for 40 years. Kitbuka assembled his force, estimated at 15,000 to 20,000 cavalry, and marched south. He did not request reinforcements, he did not fortify positions, he did not hesitate. He attacked. Qutuz led his army out of Egypt with perhaps 20,000 soldiers. His vanguard was commanded by Baybars. The two forces converged on the valley of Ain Jalut. Baybars knew this was his moment. Win, and he would be remembered as the man who stopped the Mongols. Lose, and Egypt would burn like Baghdad. There was no middle ground. The battle began at dawn. Baybars positioned his cavalry in the valley, visible, isolated, seemingly vulnerable. The Mongols saw an opportunity. Kitbuka launched a direct assault. The sound is overwhelming. Thousands of hooves on hard ground, Mongol war cries, composite bows snapping, arrows cutting through air. Arrows slam into shields, horses scream, men fall. But the line holds. Mamluk riders were trained from childhood in steppe warfare. Many of them had grown up in the same regions as the Mongols. They understood the tactics. They could match the mobility. And they refused to break. The Mongols' close distance, swords drawn, close quarters fighting. This is not the usual pattern. Mongol archers preferred range, distance, harassment. But Baybars' cavalry engages directly, absorbs the impact, holds. Then Baybars gives the order. His vanguard turns, retreats, not in panic, in formation, controlled, disciplined. The Mongols pursue. This is what they expect. The enemy breaks, they run, the Mongols chase them down. Standard protocol. Kitbuka commits his reserves. Full pursuit, do not let them regroup. The valley narrows. The terrain forces the Mongols into a tighter formation, less room to maneuver. They do not slow. And then the trap closes. Qutuz had positioned the bulk of his army in the hills on either side of the valley. As the Mongols pushed deeper into Ain Jalut, Mamluk heavy cavalry poured down from both flanks. The Mongols were surrounded. For the first time in 40 years, they were the ones caught in the trap. What follows is brutal. Mongol archers, lethal at range, are forced into melee combat. Mamluk heavy cavalry, trained for exactly this scenario, crushes the Mongol flanks. The terrain, narrow and uneven, prevents the Mongols from using their signature mobility. Kitbuka fights to hold the center. He rallies his men. He refuses to retreat. He believes, perhaps, that reinforcements will arrive, that the line will stabilize. But there are no reinforcements. Qutuz himself enters the fray, his banner raised. His presence ignites the Mamluk lines. The Mongol formation splinters. Kitbuka's horse is killed beneath him. He fights on foot, surrounded, outnumbered. He does not surrender. He dies fighting. The Mongol force is annihilated. Few escape. Mamluk riders hunt stragglers through the countryside for days. Those captured are executed. By the end of September, the Mongol presence in Syria has collapsed. September 3rd, 1260. For the first time in 40 years, a Mongol army has been destroyed in open battle. The myth is broken. Ain Jalut did not destroy the Mongol Empire. The Ilkhanate, the Mongol state established by Hulagu in Persia, would survive for another century. Mongol raids into Syria would continue sporadically. Border skirmishes persisted for decades. But something fundamental had changed. Before Ain Jalut, Mongol expansion seemed inevitable. They had conquered more territory in a single generation than Rome had in 4 centuries. After Ain Jalut, the expansion stopped. Not because of logistics, not because of overextension, but because the psychological foundation of Mongol warfare, terror, inevitability, invincibility, had fractured. Qutuz returned to Egypt as a hero. He was assassinated 3 weeks later. Baybars orchestrated the killing. He had fought at Ain Jalut, he had broken the Mongols, and now he took what he believed he had earned. He became Sultan of Egypt. He ruled for 17 years. Under his leadership, the Mamluks fortified Syria, expelled the remaining Crusader states from the Levant, and established Egypt as the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean. He never forgot what Ain Jalut had taught him. Victory required timing, preparation, and the willingness to sacrifice everything, including loyalty. The battle's significance was not just military, it was geopolitical. If Egypt had fallen, the Mongols would have controlled the Mediterranean. European Crusader states would have collapsed or become vassals. Trade routes from Asia to Europe would have been restructured entirely. The balance of power, from Africa to Europe to India, would have tilted permanently. Ain Jalut prevented that. After 1260, rulers from Europe to India understood that the Mongols could be defeated. Alliances formed, strategies adapted. The Ilkhanate, isolated in Persia, gradually converted to Islam and integrated into the regional power structure. The age of conquest was over. For centuries, Ain Jalut was remembered primarily in Islamic historiography. European accounts, focused on the Crusades, often overlooked it. Modern scholarship has gradually restored its place in the broader narrative of the Mongol conquests. We now understand it as a turning point, not because it ended Mongol power, but because it redefined the limits of that power. On September 3, 1260, in a valley in northern Palestine, 2 armies met. One had conquered half the known world. For 40 years, they had been unstoppable. The other had been enslaved, trained, and forged into something unbreakable. And when the dust settled, the age of Mongol invincibility was over. Baghdad fell because the world believed the Mongols could not be stopped. Ain Jalut succeeded because one commander refused to believe it. History does not turn on the decisions of great men alone. It turns on preparation, on timing, on the willingness to risk everything when the moment arrives. The Mongols were not defeated by superior numbers. They were not defeated by better technology. They were defeated by soldiers who understood them, who had survived them, who refused to break. 40 years of invincibility ended in a single afternoon. And the world learned that no empire, no matter how powerful, is beyond the reach of those willing to stand and fight. The Mongols would never again threaten the heartlands of the Islamic world.